WASDE report with reduced yields, logistical problems ahead for U.S. exports, and a little bit more on the scarcity of soybeans in the world that led to some rallies this week. All of that with Jerry Gidel, analyst at the Midland Research, right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. Jerry, what did you think about the USDA waste report? And then we talk about logistics.
Oh yes. Well, the combination of events here in the markets, both with corn and soybeans. The soybeans ended up taking a very impressive cut down there of over 1.2 bushels, and that down that reduction in output. They didn't end up changing anything in the exports there. They left that at 2.2 billion, which that has some issues we'll talk about later in that, but that tightened things up with a number down below 200 million. And so that definitely caught people. I don't think people thought that we would see that number this month. That doesn't mean I think a lot of people like myself didn't think we could get below it, but we did, and that's quite impressive, and that led to a very strong reaction. Corn kind of came along too because the USDA jumped in and had to adjust their exports up pretty significantly, 325 million, because the Ukrainian crop, which surprisingly they had not adjusted a little bit last month, and that because of some of the weather conditions that were going on. And we were definitely seeing lots of reports within the trade here about the fact that the Ukrainian crop was not going to make the USDA's 36 million metric ton output. They took off 8 million metric tons down on that crop. And boy, that actually, interesting, comes out to be right around 315 million bushels. And so the USDA increased our exports here up to 325 million, and or a total of 2.65 billion, which is, I think, very close, or maybe even slightly above what we've ever shipped out on a yearly basis here in the U.S. And so that tightened up our carryover stock on that down to under 1.8 billion bushels, and both of those numbers are quite a significant change from where we were talking about way back in May when the USDA put out their first initial outlook for the 2020-21 supply-demand numbers here in the U.S. So,
yeah, they seem to have taken a long time to reduce those yields.
For Ukraine particularly, is a little surprising that they didn't make a adjustment there. I think they got tied up in this whole issue about what was going on in October in the U.S. from the standpoint they needed to reduce those harvested acres because of combination of weather and also the derecho situation in Iowa that was also involved here. And then they didn't really have an update on the U.S. crop size from the producer. He had not really made a big adjustment in their on-farm survey that they were getting. So then all of a sudden the farmer survey started to show that they had maybe not as many bushels in the bin from a combination of the summertime weather and winds. And also I think the big sneaky factor this year was corn on corn yields in the Midwest. That is one of those mysterious things that can rear its head in certain years, and this happened to be one of them. I think a combination of lower prices this spring and summer before they've rallied here, where producers didn't put more money into the corn crop for fungicides to help keep things kind of going, and the fact that, from middle of July till late September, there was minimal kind of moisture from Omaha to Columbus, Ohio. So I think that's the feature that really grabbed us there. then all of a sudden now we've got the world numbers changing, and then our carryover stock has really made a significant change. But we both kind of alluded to this earlier here, is that the number of 2.65 billion bushels on corn is quite a aggressive type attitude. I think the statistic says that that's what it could happen. Let's hope we can get our logistics in the U.S. to be able to do that particular objective to move out of here. From the standpoint of corn logistics, there's two different ways we move things around here in the U.S. We have a huge system based upon the barge systems off the Illinois, Ohio, and Mississippi rivers. And interestingly enough, we're coming to the period here around the 1st of December where all of a sudden part of that system goes down. And then the other system, of course, is rail transportation that moves to the Gulf, down to the Mississippi area where the barges go, and also to the Pacific Northwest that goes across the Rocky Mountains and into Portland and Washington and places like that. And so that's the other portion of this thing that's probably the most vulnerable here if we go into the winter period.
Yes, and you also think that there could be problems. There could be problems with the crushing of soybeans.
Yes. Well, on the soybean side of things, as we go through here, we are bumping into, I think, a little bit of a short-term capacity situation. The USDA is looking at like 2.18, I should say, billion bushels. And that, I think that's reasonable. The interesting thing as we go forward here, I think there's a demand because of what's happened in Argentina and the issues they've had there with either plant problems or strikes or other issues there. And they are really a major supplier of meal, primarily to Europe. They're a big fan of Argentina soybeans / crush meal type situation. And so that's going to make things kind of interesting there too. As to, we've had a potential in that world, particularly if we end up having difficulties with the crop size down there. And La Nina, as a weather phenomenon in the Pacific, has a tendency very strong tendency to have impacting yields in both southern Brazil, on through Uruguay and northern Argentina and Buenos Aires. And so we've got lots of things floating around out here to keep ourselves highly involved here, looking forward on how this is all going to put together here, a combination of, I think there's a potential for demand in the USS. Can we do it? Now, there is some plants in process I think will be available in the U.S. for the 21-22 year. So we will have, I think, one or two that I can think of that are going to be coming online. So that we will have a chance to move higher in U.S. crush, but it's not maybe going to be available between now and in the balance of the 2021 crop year here in the U.S.
Well, you mentioned soybeans, and I want you to first comment about those significant rallies that we had with the best prices in the last 4 years, and yet if you think that is going to still improve.
Well, that's right now. I think we're in kind of a lull here after the report. I was kind of hoping maybe this, and we did have a push above the previous highs of the soybeans here, in the standpoint of the previous highs, which tends to be a positive about continuing on up. I think the one thing that we're in this kind of seasonal issue here as we towards December is, and the clock is when people tend to kind of wind down on their commercial activity, and lots of different festivals from all different religions start on from around the world all through the first half of January. So that's one of the things that is a factor in here that. But I think the one twist of it is we still have to push as much as we can out of here. I threw out the idea that we might have a $12 opportunity here after if the crop report was such. Yeah, we're what 40 cents away, I guess, thereabouts, on the highs, or 30 cents. And I think that's still a possibility. We could go back to those levels. I guess it's going to be tricky. The key question on long term, though, as to how high soybeans and corn can go is really dependent upon how does this La Nina impact Argentina, southern Brazil, but also what impact it might have on Mato Grosso. I know people are, that's not a big feature in the past. They've been had some great yields up there in La Nina years. I guess I'm cautious because of what's happened. We've just never had a very good start to this year's Brazilian bean planting season. And the one feature that happens here, I realize you plant things and they're supposed to grow. The problem is it needs water. And without water, you still don't have a crop that's growing towards being able to be harvested and be available to the markets in February. And I got a strange feeling that right now we haven't had that done. So that could still be a feature as we go through here and that. And even in the U.S. at this point, some of the weather issues that are potentially going to impact the southern U.S. across here with La Nina's impact could still be significant. Not so much on corn and soybeans being planted, things like that, but if it indicates problems with dryness, it's going to start to insinuate problems that's going to move into the Midwest next summer. This year's La Nina has been stronger than expected. It might last longer than people anticipate. So those are a couple things that we got to keep our radar up to see how things are developing both in South America and Brazil, and also what happens here in the southern half of the U.S. and how that might impact the 2021 crops.
And speaking about 2021, I see different approaches regarding about what or where China is going to be next year. Some people are saying because Biden won, they will buy more U.S. soybeans and U.S. corn. And some people are saying that they will buy more from Brazil again next year.
Well, I think they will continue to be a big supporter of South American output if it's available. The key question, how much will be available? Right now, we're anticipating the crop size to go up, I think, from the USDA side of 133 million versus maybe a 124 this last year. And that Argentina, I'm not so confident that they're going to have 53 million metric ton crop. They had a 48. That's a big difference too. The other situation is that there is also this kind of uneasiness in the fact that President-elect Biden has not been noted as talking about the tariffs and putting the kind of the push on China to follow through but on their phase one purchases. But I've also heard enough comments that he's going to be looking at other things on things he wants to do and stuff like that. So I don't think there's going to be any dropping of tariffs and that. And I think there's, at least at this point, it's going to be kind of a maybe not as outwardly news or outwardly conversations to the Chinese about what they need to do or not do. But at the same time, I kind of feel like they're, and I think if we all kind of understand the Chinese and their needs and wants to be able to keep this hog pork expansion going on in their country, they are going the route that the rest of the world has done, is to put together a intensive approach to feeding hogs in confinement. And that takes a different style of feeding than they've had for so many years. And so that demands more corn, it demands more beans to go to a feed concentrated type of approach to get the kind of pork available. So it's a situation where I think there's still ideas that the Chinese are still going to be around. I guess that is going to be one of those $1 million questions as we get to next February and March, as to how the U.S. and Chinese relationships going, and how maybe there's going to be a little more mutual respect between the two, and everybody knows that if we get along together, we can all be better off, and maybe that'll be just as good an approach as us pointing the finger at them and tell them that they need to do more. Well, sometimes that doesn't always work with people. They don't like to be showed up, and I think the tender approach could be a better approach right now to keep our agricultural sales going forward. At least I think that's a possibility. Let's hope.
What do you think from next week, Jerry?
Next week is going to be interesting. We had a little positive response here at the end of the week where we bounced a little bit in prices. I kind of feel like that there's still some uncertainties about South American weather and I still feel like there's at least another push, or at least a certain amount of push in the U.S. to get as much as they can out through the barge system before it will be shut down in early December. So I'm kind of hoping, I guess I'm optimistic. I'm not sure I would say you never want to hope for anything because it never happens. But if you're optimistic, maybe that's a better approach from there, in the fact that I think there's still enough uncertainties in that we can bounce around here and maybe challenge the recent highs. I have to say, though, that if producers in the U.S. here looking at some cash needs and that, I'd have to encourage them to utilize return to the recent highs as an opportunity to make some marketing decisions and kind of get ready to have a good Christmas that we haven't had for 2 or 3 years.
Have a great week, Jerry. Thank you.
Good to be with you again, Louis. Have a good day.